Growing up in the hills of West Virginia, I never thought that one day my childhood hero, my Papaw Smith, would bring us closer together. Every weekend, my mom and dad would take a trip to my nanny and Papaw Smith's. They lived maybe 5 miles away from our house, which was not only convenient, but great for me because it seemed like we were always there visiting. On the weekends, especially, Nanny would be always have something cooking up on the stove. It could be the garlicky smell of the fried chicken popping and hissing in her frying pan, or her world famous, to me, fried deer steak. She would say, "Fellas, come in here and I made you some deer steak." While Nanny would be doing her magic in the kitchen, quite often my Papaw Smith would be sitting on his rocking chair, snacking on some mixed nuts or tossing some hard candy into his mouth. It was that boring candy that you were always familiar with as a kid that came in a little can during Christmas time. I remember watching the TV series MASH with my papaw, or a Western on the weekends. It could be Dukes of Hazzard, Hee Haw. But also during those visits, I would find myself looking at his picture, gazing. This picture was from the early 50s when he was dressed in his army dress uniform. He had that unforgettable smile on his face and looked very happy. Also, not surprisingly, a little ornery. I always imagined what it would be like. Loved hearing the stories of how he stood up for his brother who was being picked on by a bully in their unit. He would say, "I was up for corporal, but I popped him in the nose, and the bully went away, and so did me making corporal." You see, Papa was about 5'7". He was strong as an ox, barrel chested. He was very handsome, like me. He had a comb over, dark complexion, due to his maternal grandma being a full blooded Cherokee Indian. He loved smoking his menthols, which would eventually be to his detriment. Papal pronounced oil Earl and traveled to every state in the contiguous United States to include Washington, D.C. I always wanted to be like him, strong, kind spirited, loving, and sentimental. I always have an appetite like my Papaw. He didn't have any enemies. You couldn't but only love him after you met him. Often, when you would joke around with him, Papaw, he would politely agree with the joke by saying, "Right." Now, moving along in March of 1998, having graduated from Army basic training at Fort Jackson, I had my own picture taken. I was a PFC, and I was a far distance from Fort Wainwright, Alaska, where my Papaw Smith had that picture taken during the Korean War. But alas, I was a PFC just like him, my childhood hero. 4 years later, after having graduated from basic training in 2002, my Papaw was there in his suit, me in my Class A uniform, with a proud look gleaming from his face. He gave me my first salute, and I returned it to my Papaw, proud as ever. You see, I was a newly minted butter bar, a second lieutenant, United States Army. I returned the salute crisply and shook his hand and placed a Korean War 50th anniversary commemorative coin in his hand. I could see Papaw's eyes swell with tears. I instantly saw the pride coming, tearing down his eyes. After the ceremony was over, my Papaw told me, "Jimmy, I'm proud of you." I hugged him and said, "Thank you, Papaw. I love you too." This also meant that I would not be able to visit him as often as I wanted to, given I went straight forward to Fort Sill, Oklahoma on active duty. Forward 5 years later, it's October 2007. Papa was in hospice care in the same living room where I watched TV with him and Nanny on countless occasions. He was suffering from COPD, emphysema, and Parkinson's. My family was visiting him a few months before I went off to train for a deployment to Afghanistan. I remember handing him my barely 2-month-old daughter, Emma, and I said, "Papa, I love you with all my heart. The Army is sending me to Afghanistan early next year." He quickly responded without hesitation, "That sucks." I chuckled, knowing that even though he was in pain, he still had that sense of humor. Several months had passed on this deployment in this hell that was called Afghanistan. The Afghans thought we were the Russians. Coming back from one of the countless mounted patrols we would take, I had finished my mission trying to relax by taking a hot shower, washing off the sweat, dirt, and grime off my body. I was the gunner on top of the up-armored Humvee. After cleaning up, I headed to the MWR hut where I would make a call to my mom every Sunday. I called my mom and she said, Dad is gone. He passed. You need to come home. Come home, Jimmy. I didn't want to break her heart, given the grief was already killing her, and to tell her because I'm forward deployed on a forward operating base with a handful of fellow service members, there was no in hell that I was going to make it in time. Yes, the Red Cross messages did come, but I did not. Back home to say my farewells and goodbyes to my Papaw Smith. Now, almost 16 years to the day, I sit here as a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel. I continue to remember that man, my Papaw Smith, and those Army pink and greens smiling at me. I now own the commemorative coin, the portrait of him in his DD 214. I believe he continues to smile down on me and all those he left behind. You're one of a kind, a legend, and I am forever grateful God made me your grandson. I love you, Papaw. Give Nanny and Mom my best. Love, Jimmy.